Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Laura Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good morning. It is 6 o'clock here in the morning, Calgary, Alberta, on Tuesday, August the 24th, and I'm happy to be here. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, 30-minute live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. And the chat room is open if anybody would like to sit in there. Yesterday we were talking about an article that I found called Shame Hiding Places, and I want to continue looking at that. There's some good information for people who have survived child abuse and who might have taken on shame, right? Which I didn't even know really what the term shame meant, except for to hear it used in sentences and stuff such as, shame on you or shame on your behavior, that kind of thing. I just associated shame with that, and so I didn't really realize exactly what it was. But this article is really quite interesting. It talks a lot about family roles and what people take on as far as behavioral issues because of shame. So it's sort of based on John Bradshaw's work, and it's written by a survivor. So I want to continue looking at that this morning. And so you have to listen at your own discretion. The topics of abuse are very sensitive, and depending on how far along you are in your healing journey, right? If you're not feeling strong and you're just not feeling safe, then you need to turn the show off, right? And listen at another time when you're feeling better and maybe have somebody there with you, right? Because this kind of information can trigger people. And I know because I'm a survivor, so I understand, and that's why I always tell people to make sure that you're in a safe enough place to listen to my shows first of all, and if not, you can come back another time. The archive should still be there for till whenever, so you can always listen at another time when you're feeling just more strong and able to handle the material, right? And if you're a young person under the age of 18, I ask that you have someone listen to my shows with you, just like an adult, a caregiver, a parent, if you have a parent who cares about what you're listening to and doing online, which I hope you do. Or a teacher, a counselor, mentor, someone in your life who's older who can help you make the decision whether you should be listening to this, right? Because the whole, it's mainly geared for adult survivors of child abuse, this show, One Child Abuse Survivor to Another. And young people might find the information kind of confusing, might not realize what I'm talking about, and not realize what the information is about that I'm reading from on the web. So you want to have somebody listen with you. That way, if you have questions, you can look for the answers together, and it's just a good idea, right? And also to keep yourself safe online. Young people, you cannot do enough to protect yourselves, and I hope if you're a parent out there, you will protect your children and get the information on how to stay safe online. It's so important. Just type into your browser internet safety for children, online safety, this type of thing. And it'll bring up all kinds of websites with good information about how to keep yourself safe when you're online. It's just so important. It's what I do to, fight to save children's lives. It's what I'll be doing for the rest of my life. And so, it's so important we cannot just brush this off and not think it's important, right? It's so important to keep yourself safe and your family safe, right? So we'll get right on into this article here. And I'm not a professional counselor or therapist, right? I always say this on every show because it's so important for people to know. I know that truth is everything to me. So I'm just a survivor, and I just want to bring information out to people that I'm finding is very helpful for me on my journey, on my walk, and take a look at some of it. I don't self-diagnose myself, so if I see something on post-traumatic stress disorder, just for example, people have asked me, they've actually asked me the question, do you think you have PTSD or anything like that, and I always have to answer and just say I don't know. I've never been diagnosed. Now sometimes I sort of, I can relate to the information, I can relate to the symptoms or the signs or whatnot of these different things, but it doesn't mean that I actually have it. So I never self-diagnose myself because too many people do, and then they haven't been diagnosed by a professional, licensed person, right? Whether it's a therapist or a counselor or a psychotherapist or whatever, a doctor. We don't want to go self-diagnosing ourselves, and I know that lots of people do, and my dad is famous for that. And I saw him doing that, and my mom actually, my whole life, and so actually I just decided not to be like them, and so I don't self-diagnose myself. So a lot of the stuff I relate to, but does it mean that I have it? No. So that's why it's so important for people to know that when you're listening to this kind of stuff, or if you're reading on the web, I do a lot of reading on the web and searching it for information for myself, and if I see something I relate to, I don't take it on as my own thing. I'm just like, well, I relate to that, or I understand that, or I've been there, experienced that. But then I don't say, oh, well, I must have that, diagnose myself, right? I never do that because I have not been diagnosed because I have not had any formal counseling. It's all self-help for me. And so, I talk a lot about my healing journey, which just started actually recently, about 3.5 years ago. So, yeah, it's just important that we don't do that. And you want to get help. If you're really suffering and you're having a hard time, and I would never suggest just sitting around in silence and sitting around in sorrow and sadness and grief. If you're a survivor out there and you're having a hard time, just reach out to somebody. Like I got involved with online group support, and that really helped me out. That was just a whole bunch of survivors who, I was able to talk to and meet, and a lot of them were on there anonymously, and that's totally cool. And it's just good to have someone to relate to, someone who can, who's there for you. These people are on their healing journeys too, and so it's very, there's just something awesome about it when people are pulling you along, saying you can do it. You didn't deserve that, and we're here for you. And that's just so important to have somebody in your life who you can talk to when you're just feeling really down, and maybe just having some bad memories or just a bad day, and all of us have a bad day. Don't even have to be abused as a child to have a bad day. Now that's the truth. And so many people are down, and it's just good to have a friend to talk to, right? So it's important to get some help, right? Whether it's a counselor, a therapist, group support, online group support, crisis line, those people are manned by people like you and me who probably have been there, experienced it, and want to give back, want to help people out. And they are trained, and they know how to help people, and they know how to get people help. And if you find someone you can't relate to, just keep looking, That's what I would suggest, right? I know myself, when I go searching for a counselor or a therapist, I'm going to be very particular about who I search out. And this person, if I don't relate to them and they don't relate to me, I'll just move on, because it's very important to find someone that we can talk to that understands us and wants to help, right? So important. So we'll get right into this article here. And this is called Shame Hiding Places. It's not from John Bradshaw. This is written about his book, really. It's kind of a rundown from a lady called Hope for Us. Hope for Us is a survivor of childhood physical, sexual, emotional, and ritualistic abuse. And there's a little blurb here on this website. She is currently writing a book on the subject that will include other self-help ideas like this. And it's called www.hopeforsurvivors.com. And that's hope with a number 4, survivors.com. This is what I was reading from yesterday, and it's called Shame Hiding Places. Well, what she's done is read John Bradshaw's book, and she's just talking about what he was talking about, and also, discussing some of the things in her life and different things like that. And I think it's very helpful for me to see this stuff. She talks a lot about the dysfunction and what happens, with shame, and how people take shame on, and what happens to their behavior because of it. It's quite interesting, I think. She's gone on to talk about the false self and family system roles, and I think that's where I want to pick up this morning. Excuse me. Says, because this is she talks about John Bradshaw's book, and Healing the Shame That Binds You. That's his book, right? And she says, the false self, Bradshaw says, once internalized, we no longer have the feeling of shame. We are it. Because we experience ourselves as flawed and defective, we cannot look at ourselves without pain. And therefore, we must create a false self. For more detailed information, she says here, I highly recommend getting a copy of John Bradshaw's book, Healing the Shame That Binds You, and reading pages 82 through 86. I would really like to get a hold of that book myself, and I probably will, as soon as I can afford it. I'm kind of, financially strapped right now, but eventually I'd like to get a copy. Maybe I can pick one up at a used store somewhere or something, a used bookstore. Family system roles. All families have roles that each family member fills. In healthy families, the father and mother model what it is to be male and female, a father and mother, a husband and wife. Parents should model in healthy ways what it is to be intimate, how to maintain healthy boundaries, solve problems, and discipline in appropriate, loving ways. The role of children is to be curious and learn. This is just what she's talking about here. Healthy families have flexible roles that any one member can take on at any given time. For example, mom might be the hero one day because she changed a flat tire. Daughter might be the hero another day because she volunteers to cook dinner. Brother might be the hero on another day because he voluntarily does the laundry, and Dad's the hero when he takes the family on vacation. These types of flexible roles are healthy when they are taken on voluntarily and spontaneously. It says, however, dysfunctional families require unhealthy roles that may be inappropriate for the age of the family member, particularly children. You might want to think, she says here, about your own family of origin and consider what role you played in order to keep the family together. I was Daddy's little princess for a while, and then my sister took that role. She says here, both my sister and I were the family sacrifice. My mother was the martyr and chief enabler. My brother was often the scapegoat. And many therapists feel that it is beneficial to explore the role you played and put a name on it. So that's kind of interesting. I've never really actually done that. So there's all kinds of interesting things I'm sure that we can do to sort of take a look at what happened to us and the whole situation surrounding it, to help us see the bigger picture of the roles that we played and whatnot, and that's something I haven't really done. It's important to realize that when we take on these dysfunctional roles, we give up our true, authentic self and take on a false self, and these roles help to create a shame-based family system. As survivors, we often carry on these false, dysfunctional roles into adulthood because they give us a sense of identity, but they also keep us stuck in our toxic shame. And so she goes on to talk here about shamelessness, which is a third layer of protection. It says, against feeling our toxic shame is acting shameless. Acting shameless can take the form of several behaviors that alter our sense of shame, like perfectionism. Perfectionism is learned when a person is valued only for doing. I once heard this referred to as becoming a human doing instead of a human being. A perfectionist has no sense of healthy shame or internal limits. They never know how much is good enough. And she says here, in my family, perfectionism was a multi-generational means for passing the hot potato of toxic shame. My maternal grandmother was a perfectionist in the strictest sense of the word. Her house would have passed anyone's white glove test at any given time of the day, week, or month, or year. She had a fireplace sealed off from the chimney, and it was never used. It was not good enough that there be no smoke or ashes from the fire. She was determined to keep every speck of environmental dirt outside her house. Having the fireplace flue closed was not good enough. She had the chimney cemented shut, and the windows in her house were painted shut as well. Before my grandparents were able to afford central air conditioning, they sweltered in the summer heat with nary a window open. This is what she's written here. Grandma was afraid that dust and grime from the street would soil her curtains. While my mother was not much of a housekeeper, she used this perfectionistic measure against my sister and me as we performed our weekly household chores. No matter how hard we tried, we never quite measured up. So I guess that's that whole perfectionism thing, right? Power and control. It says, you've heard the expressions control freak and power junkie. These are direct references to this defense mechanism that is a part of shamelessness. Striving for power is a way to control other people. And as Bradshaw says, those who must control everything fear being vulnerable, because to be vulnerable opens one up to being shamed. And she talks about rage here. Bradshaw believes that rage is the most naturally occurring cover-up for shame. It protects us in two ways, keeping others away or transferring our shame to others. So note, this is not the same as justified rage. However, even justified rage at being abused, abandoned, neglected, or violated can be internalized when not expressed. Well, that's what happened to me, and I think that's what happens to a lot of people, right? What was originally meant to protect us against further experiences of shame can become a state of being. And this kind of rage can turn into hatred and result in violence and criminal behavior, and that's exactly what happened to me. So, as a young person, right? And then later, I just internalized it, and it was just sitting there, always there. And it's hard, I want to take one day I'm going to take a real good look at rage. I'd like to see what more they have to say about it. I didn't know a whole lot about what it really meant. I just understand the action behind it, the actual, physical action behind rage, but I didn't realize there was so much actually written on it. Arrogance is another one. Webster's defines arrogance as being overbearing and acting self-important. It is a defense mechanism for covering up shame. And criticism and blame. Bradshaw believes that criticism and blame are perhaps the most common ways that shame is interpersonally transferred. It is a way of reducing the feeling of humiliation and shame a person feels by criticizing and blaming someone else. Children subject to criticism and blame are shamed to the core. Children have no way to decode their parents' defensive behavior, and children interpret criticizing and blaming in this way as I'm bad. They come to believe that all the fighting and arguing is their fault. And that's a big one, because it's never the children's fault. It's the adults in the situation. It's their fault. Children are not to blame for that kind of stuff. And, that's the sad part, is that we end up paying the price for it as children, right? And so many people have, been through this. And, it's good to know that it was not it could not be our fault, because the adults in the situation should have been able to manage things, and if they couldn't, it certainly wasn't the child's fault, right? But I mean, we're quite often as children, if you've been abused or abandoned, like neglected, abandoned, anything like that, children tend to take that on as being their fault, and there's in no way possible that it could be. And I'm so glad that as an adult I realized that. But so many people don't, and they still carry that whole burden of guilt and this false guilt, because it doesn't even belong to them. And that's sad. That's a sad way to live, be feeling that, I'm not worth it, and, I must be all these things they told me. And, I kind of went through some of that, just about my own feelings about myself. Now, I didn't necessarily agree with what my parents said, especially as an older adult, as far as, you're worthless, and all the stuff I heard as I was a kid, right? And, just a bad kid, or you're evil, or whatnot. I used to hear all kinds of stuff like that. And of course, you kind of take that on as a youth, as a young kid. But then I got older and I started realizing that none of that stuff was true. But still, my inner voice, I could still hear my mom's voice. I could still hear my dad's voice ringing very loudly and very clear, all the stuff they had told me. So it was a matter of getting it out of my system and not allowing it to affect the way that I was feeling about myself. And I've actually been able to do a lot of work in that area, mainly through positive affirmations, believing in myself, and working through a few things, and realizing that, hey, I'm not perfect, I'm going to make mistakes, because, when you grow up abused as a child, you always, especially if you grew up around and you were abused for making mistakes, which I was, in our family, and I wasn't the only one, we all were. So it's when you grow older, that same feeling of repercussions kind of comes back to you. If you make a mistake, it's like, you know what I mean? So it's like you have to almost undo that damage, right? And say, okay, I'm going to make mistakes. And that's okay, because everybody does. And so I am good. I'm worth it. I can do it. I might make mistakes along the way, and that's okay. And, everybody does, right? So I don't have to be walking around on eggshells anymore, right? And that's the whole thing. And it's hard, but I did it, and I managed to work through quite a bit of it. It's taken me this last year for sure. And but I started my healing journey about 3.5 years ago. So it's I've been working on it, right? And I still have a little ways to go in some areas. But it's good to to believe in ourselves. We have to, right? I mean, we're just perfect. We're just as capable of doing what anybody else can do. It's just if you've been brought up or lived in an abusive environment, it can wear you down. You know what I mean? And so we have to, as adults, seek out that help, right? Whatever it is, whether it's self-help, or, like I said earlier, group support, getting a friend, someone to talk to, someone who cares enough to listen and will sort of help us make sense of things. It does help. It helps a lot to talk to people. And I used to sit around and not talk to anybody, especially the last few years before I started my healing journey, because I lost a lot of friends over this. I told people in my life about my past, and of course they all disappeared, right? And even a friend of mine who I was best friends with for 12 years, finally told me I was just too much. She said, "You're just too much. You need professional help. I can't help you, and you're I don't know." She didn't say I was driving her crazy, but I could imagine that might have been how she was feeling, because she was like, you're just too needy, right? It's just, you're just too wounded. And at the time I was. I for sure I was. And that's why 3.5 years ago I was sitting on the couch wanting to self-injure and plan my suicide again. And I thought, what am I doing? I don't want to continue on like this for another 20, 30 years. I don't. I want to live. I want to fight to live. And I started getting very proactive and started getting off the couch and, learn how to get past this stuff. And, I'm so glad that I made the decision to do that, and I hope that you will too. She says here, judgmentalism and moralizing. These are the offspring of perfectionism. Condemning others as bad or sinful is a way to feel morally correct and righteous. Bradshaw believes that children who are the victims of perfectionism, judgment, and moralizing are not only victims of emotional abuse, but also spiritual abuse. And that's very true, because that's what I went through. That's what my family went through, because we were all told that we were evil, that we were from the devil, because my dad was always trying to point out that my mom was like a whore, and we were the devil's kids, right? Maybe she was sleeping with the devil or something. Then my mom would be like, well, you were the devil, They were completely screwed up. They were so completely messed up. They had so many mental issues themselves. My dad was borderline schizophrenic, and my mom was manic depressive, and who knows what else was going on with her. They were miserable people, and they put their garbage on us, right? And made us feel bad about being alive. They made us feel bad about who we were, as in the family role. They made us feel bad about being on the earth. And I remember being a very small kid and being made to feel bad because I was even here on the planet. My mom would tell me, well, you should have just died like the other two before you, and you're just a rape child anyway. I didn't want you in the first place, and this type of stuff, right? And of course, I was only about 8 years old, 9 years old hearing this, and I'd be like, well, that's just great. Thanks a lot, And with the physical abuse as well, it just hammered it in there, that she did not want me, and that I was just a punching bag to her, right? So, and my dad, of course, was just always, oh, you kids are evil. You're from Satan. He was very much messed up in the head, and he still is, but he does quite well now. He's 87 years old, and he does a lot better than he used to, right? So it's so important that if you've been through this stuff, we didn't deserve that. No kid deserves that. No child deserves that. I don't care what kind of abuse it is, whether it's physical, verbal, psychological, emotional, spiritual, sexual, like neglect, you name it. It's not right, and it did not belong to us. We did not deserve it. And so we have to learn how to love ourselves. We have to learn how to love this life that we've been given, and how to go for our dreams and to set goals, and how to have a normal life that everybody else can have, if they choose to, right? And I mean, I'm so glad I actually had people tell me this when I was about 13 and a half years old. This family started incorporating this stuff into my life. They would tell me these things when I would be at their house visiting and staying with them, and because they knew my situation, and they knew I certainly wasn't hearing any of this at home, right? And so they would be like, you just have to keep loving your heart. You have to love yourself, and you have to, learn how to grow and have a good life. And I kept that with me, even though, I continued to self-destruct for years and continued to hurt myself and to just live this kind of an existence, from the abuse that I suffered, and just so, with a lot of hatred in my heart and whatnot. I kept that stuff I kept it with me, and I remembered it. And over the years, as time would go by, in my mid-20s, and then moving on up to my 30s and mid-30s, this stuff would kind of stay with me, that this family had instilled in me when I was around 13 and a half, because it really meant a lot to me to hear that I didn't deserve the abuse, and that it wasn't my fault, and all that stuff stayed with me, and I'm so glad that I had that family to do that. Not all of us do. Now I didn't, they didn't adopt me or anything like that, but what they did do was they intervened on my behalf and allowed me to stay in their home when my mom was, having a hard time and things were getting bad. I could just phone them and they would come pick me up. I'd be able to stay at their home, right? So that really helped me out a lot, right? I know not every kid gets that, right? So, we have to do this. We have to believe in our abilities. We have to learn to love ourselves. We have to, first of all, learn how to trust, and to trust ourselves. And if you're having a hard time doing that, you have to get some help, right? If we're going to ever move on to have this life that we really deserve to have as adults, right? To make our own plans, to make our own path and our own way in this world, and not suffer through the whole entire thing, then we can get help. And I think that is just so important for people to know, that there's good help out there. There's people out there that care and that have been there, and they just want to help, So make sure you do reach out, if you're listening to this, or you're listening on the archive, just don't suffer in silence on your own. It's so sad to see people doing that, and when there's people out there who can help us, and if you need qualified, person, like someone who's certified, a counselor, therapist, right? Then that's the way to go, because they can help us. You know what I mean? If you just cannot cope, You have to reach out and get help, and you have to phone a crisis line and call somebody and tell them, I need help. Because you know what? The shame doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the abusers. And for me, I'm so glad to be able to stand up and say, hey, you know what? I was abused. Do I have to allow it to kill me? No. As an adult, do I have to self-destruct because of it? No. Do I have to continually suffer just to know who I am and be able to identify with myself? No. Because I believe now that it doesn't, abused or not abused, I am who I am. And I have to learn to like myself and to love myself for who I am. And so I've done a lot of work on that. And I hope that other people will too, because it's so important. Because until you do that, you just continually kind of suffer on in this thing, right? And it's like I realized, hey, I did not deserve that. I count. I matter. This is ridiculous. I can have a good life too. And there's no reason why I can't go out there and do it. Nobody's going to hand it to me on a platter, that's for sure. And help is, like I like to say, help isn't going to come knocking on the door. Not in my lifetime. It hasn't. The help just knocking on the door saying, "Hey, I'm here to help you. Let's heal." That never happened for me. I was always hoping that it would, but the thing is, we have to seek it out. We have to search it out, and we have to be really the first ones to make the first step, because quite often people don't know we're having these problems. A lot of people would never know that we've been abused because maybe we would never tell them. A lot of people don't ever disclose they've been abused to anyone. And so they suffer on in silence, and shame, when the shame was not even theirs in the first place. So that's why I decided to be a voice. I want to get out there and do a lot of public speaking. And I wrote my story, A Life of Death to Redemption. It used to be a blog called Not So Fond Memories Growing Up in an Abusive Home. And Donna Shear, the president of Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and Sandra Potter, the CEO and founder, saw it, and they said, it should be a book. Donna Shear, she's a best-selling author. She said, your story could help a lot of people. She said, you really should have that published. And I was like, well, I had to think about it for a little bit, and I thought, okay, if it destroys the relationships the dysfunctional relationships I still have with the remaining family members of mine, which are only 3, then it does. Because I can't live in a lie, and I can't I just sit here and not disclose the truth, especially because I want to do public speaking and to stop child abuse, right? Promoting awareness and education and prevention, to stop child abuse, right? So I can't very well say, oh, other survivors, you should tell your story, speak up, don't remain in silence. Silence really is the issue. It keeps child abuse going, and it keeps survivors stuck in their own miserable existence, right? And so I can't very well say, oh, everyone should break the silence, and then me sitting there, if somebody was to say, what about you? Have you experienced this? I thought, man, I can't lie and say no. So I'd have to say yes, and then people would be like, well, let's hear your story. So I thought, you know what, I am telling my story. And not only that, I wanted to be one more voice out there for survivors to know that they're not alone, and that we certainly didn't deserve to be treated that way. And, I don't have to carry this shame. A lot of people would say, well, aren't you ashamed that people would know about your family life and stuff? And I'm sure people actually think about that with what I'm doing with the Blog Talk Radio and One Child Abuse Survivor to Another. And actually, am I ashamed? No, because the shame does not belong to me. It belongs to my abusers, which would be my parents and one of my brothers. So those are my abusers. The shame belongs to them. It certainly did not belong to me. So in realizing that, I'm able to walk forward and move forward and not be ashamed. I can hold my head high, and I can say, you know what, I did not deserve that. I'm a good person. No one deserves that, and thank God I can move on, you know what I mean? Because while I was allowing myself to stay in that shame and that hiding place, right, I was not able to move to freely heal and move forward, because I was taking on their shame and saying, oh, I'll just stay quiet, it's too shameful. You know what I mean? It's my, taking it on as our own shame sort of thing. So it's just so important that people know to get some help, to reach out and continue to fight, fight to heal and to have a good life, right? Well, we have about a minute left. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Be back on tomorrow morning, same time, 6 o'clock, One Child Abuse Survivor to Another. Get a hold of me if you need something on Blog Talk Radio, Facebook, and whatnot. I'll be around tonight and checking my messages and whatnot. So take care of yourselves. Have a really good day. Reach out and get some help. Don't suffer in silence. It's just such a bad way to go. And, we deserve to have a good life. Just remember that. We do count. We do matter. And as children growing up in dysfunctional and abusive homes, we certainly weren't probably told that. So we have to tell ourselves this all the time, that we do count, we do matter, and we do deserve to have a good life. So we have to seek it out. How are we going to get it? How are we going to do it? Start looking for the answers. Start looking for what's going to work for you and what will work for us, right? So we can move forward. So take care, everybody, and we'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.